Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this special edition of Fakeland, the INSS podcast on disinformation, influence, fake news, and psychological warfare. In this English edition, we will discuss the evolution of the war in Gaza from the international perspective, and we will try to understand the influence of the war and the atrocities on public opinion. My name is Attila Somfalvi, and I am a researcher at the INSS. My guests today are Dr. Vera Michlin Shapir and Dr. Ofer Friedman, both stationed in London at Symposium Institute for Strategic Communications. Thank you both for being with us. Let me start by asking, how does Israel do from your perspective since the war began? Dr. Michlin, you go first.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Attila. So I think when we look at, say, public opinion, right, or information space, or whatever we call it, there are a lot of contradictory things. There are a lot of contradictory understandings of how well are you doing in that space that you can understand from, it's every day, new news cycle, you see different things. For instance, right now, we're in the midst of a ceasefire and we see releases of hostages, and there is, again, quite a lot of sympathy towards Israel. But I think the bottom line is that both Israelis and those who understand the Israeli narrative and have some kind of empathy, right, not necessarily sympathy, but have an understanding for the Israeli narratives, feel a very strong sense that throughout this war, the Israeli narrative doesn't come across as well as it could, right? So the point is that you wouldn't expect everyone to side with Israel. The question is, are we able to tell the Israeli story in a way that is understandable and comprehensible for international audiences? And there, I think, there is a broad agreement that we're not able to do so, that the Israeli side is not able to tell its story in a comprehensive, in a way that audiences around the world can understand and can, to some extent, empathize with. Again, not necessarily sympathize. You don't have to take Israel's side. But the question is, do you get the facts and do you get the story? Do you understand what is actually happening from the Israeli side? And then, unfortunately, the answer is no. The answer is that we're not able to do so.
Yeah. Dr. Friedman, at the beginning of the war, for 3 days at least, we felt here in Israel that the public opinion is with us. They sympathize or any other feeling that they had because of the harsh pictures coming out from the kibbutz and the cities around Israel. Why was that so short?
Well, when we're talking about, let's put it in the brackets, the war for public opinion, as any war, it includes battles and operations and campaigns and the overall war. So to support what Vera said, occasionally, especially in the beginning, we won this battle, but we are not very good in maintaining a coherent and consistent campaign. And this is what you can see in kind of what Vera mentioned in fluctuation of the public opinion. Suddenly there is expressions of sympathy or empathy, and some occasionally it's kind of all disappears when there are some pictures from Gaza Strip arrive and the destruction from there. So we won several battles. We are not so good at maintaining a long-term coherent campaign to win this war. And as we know, winning the battles does not necessarily leads to a victory in the overall campaign.
I'm asking you both, what should be Israel's message during this war in order to have the public opinion, the international press, the leaders, the public at large standing behind Israel? Dr. Michlin.
So I think I would not start with the message, really. The message is actually something that you do last. And the first thing you do before you think about the message, and there could be a variety of messages that different audiences, right? There is no one international audience. There are different audiences out there. So first of all, you think about how you're going to run your communications. You start from how you're running your communications. Who are the main actors? what is your strategy in a way? So what are your resources? What do you have on your side? Yes. Who are the actors that you can rely on? How would you be able to communicate certain actions that you know that you're about to take? And whether then do you go back and you revise the actions that you're going to take in accordance to how this is going to play out in information space, in communications? And only at the end, after you've done all these things, you think about your message. So point number one is that it's not that you do something and then you explain it, right? It's not a reactive process. You think about how you're going to communicate as a state. You rely on your resources, on the things that you have in your toolbox, right? So that could be the institutions that you have, that could also be your friends abroad, right? So what do you have there that you can use? You think about what kind of action. So it was very clear from the very start that Israel is going to war against Hamas. And that would mean that there will be images of destruction coming out of the Gaza Strip, right? This is the environment we were going into. So now you think, how am I going to communicate within this environment? So you can't just say, this is the message I'm going to go with. Yes, Israel is defending itself against Hamas, which is a great message, right? But it needs to work within the resources that you have at your disposal, and also within the environment that you're going to encounter. And it was very easy from the very start to know what Western, for instance, and newspapers are going to look like. There will be images of destructions from the Gaza Strip. So how do you work with that? So the message, in a way, comes last. The message is the last thing you think about. You will find a good message if you've done everything, if you build up your strategy properly.
Dr. Friedman.
Yeah, just to kind of support this, this kind of the preoccupation, the obsession about the message in Israeli discourse about this fight, this war for public opinion. It's the source of the problem. Messages is kind of using this metaphor of war for public opinion. Messages are bullets. It's tactical actions. And this is what the Israeli preoccupation with messages and on the tactical actions sometimes leads to certain battle victories, small victories. And this is why they're focusing on the battles and missing the whole picture of the campaign. The campaign starts with understanding the environment, who are our opponents, what they're saying, what they're thinking. It's a target audience analysis. It is understanding the narratives. Then you build the narratives, which are narratives already exist in the discourse in our target audiences. What narratives are promoted by our adversaries, in this case, Hamas and co. And only then, once you understand the strategic environment in which you operate, only then you go down to find the right message to win a short-term battle within this theater.
Dr. Michlin, how big is the interest of the British public, for example, for what's happening here in Israel? How interested they are to see, to read, to watch?
I think this is something that is by nature fluctuating, right? I mean, foreign policy issues are not the top of the agenda for most Western countries, and the UK is not an exception in that. In these, I mean, it's not an exception to this rule. So people are far more interested in domestic affairs. They're far more interested in the economy. And where this rupture kind of can happen, where foreign policy can overtake the agenda, is when big things are happening, right? When there is something that is large enough, and then by extension, when it's large enough, it's also important enough possibly to impact what is happening within Western countries, right? Within the UK. So obviously the massacre, the 7th of October massacre, that was one such rupture, because it was clear that, well, in the UK you have both Jewish and Muslim communities, and that can have an impact, and it already has an impact on life in the UK. So it is fluctuating. It's hard to tell. Not every story that comes out from the Middle East or from Israel and its war with Hamas is interesting. So actually, you are, in a way, if you want to tell your story, if you want to tell the story from your point of view, you have to think about the stories that are already being told within the UK, for instance, right? What are people in the UK? What are they talking about? What is interesting for them? And if you find something that can relate to that, you are much more likely to get the headline in the UK. So this is the information environment.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Michlin. Dr. Friedman, I would like to ask you about the wide gap that we see between the leaders in European countries and in the US and the public at large. What do the leaders understand that the ordinary people don't vis-a-vis this war?
Yeah. So first of all, we should not get confused by the demonstrations in support of Hamas and pro-Palestinian demonstrations organized here. The vast majority of the public is sitting in the middle. As Vera said, they are focusing more on domestic issues, on economy, and so on. They're not interested too much in what is going on in Israel. But what we have to understand is that any foreign affairs issue essentially becomes a domestic issue, especially as big as a war. And to be successful in communicating our messages and finding empathy, we need to understand how these narratives are used in domestic politics. Let's, for example, think about what is going on regarding support to Ukraine within the American politics, within the British politics. Okay, the same is already happening inside UK about Israel. We had a huge wave of resignations in the Labour Party from the from the front benches because of the disagreement about the Labour Party line in support of Israel. So if we want to, so basically what happened is that the foreign issue has become domestic issue. And in the next months, and as this conflict will continue, the rivalry between two larger parties will play these narratives in an attempt to win public opinion. So if we want our story to be told, and we want that this support will continue, we need to understand this environment. It's not about messages. It's about how war in Israel has been used in the war of narratives within the domestic politics inside UK.
Now I'd like to take you to foreign influence. We all know that the Iranians are playing a part in this war, and we also know that the Russians are playing a part in this war by trying to seed disinformation or to spread false news about what's happening and so on. So, Dr. Michlin, you are an expert on what's happening with the Russians in this field. Can you tell us, do you recognize their fingerprints on disinformation and active measures being taken and made these days?
Mm-hmm. So the Russians, I mean, it's a bit of a kind of starting from the end, it's a bit of a no-brainer, right? I mean, the Russians have chosen a side, and they, from the very start, very quickly, they decided that they will be on the side of Hamas. But that is, again, I mean, this is going back to what Ofer and I were outlining here, how actually in communications, right, things are actually happening before the event, before the D-Day, right, before the event is actually has occurred. So the Russians have been moving throughout their war with Ukraine. They've been moving in the direction of this axis, this Shia axis. I mean, this starts from their war in Syria, but really since the invasion of Ukraine, they've been moving closer and closer towards Iran. So they're finding themselves now with the Iranians as their strategic partners. And so when this happens, right, when this major event is taking place, when the massacre on the 7th of October is taking place, the Russians are already positioned to be on the side of Hamas. They're not, it's not something that's not a decision that they're making at the moment. They already made the decision months ago. We just haven't seen the manifestation. And from that point, we see really almost textbook kind of Russian all-out disinformation campaign online against Israel. And very importantly, within the Russian, so from the Russian point of view, again, every actor is playing an information space according to the stories that they tell themselves and the things that are important for them. So for them right now, it's very important to make sure that this harms Ukraine. Yes, they're far less interested in what it does to Israel and far more interested in harming Ukraine. So for instance, they're really pushing this fake story, or not necessarily fake story, but manipulated story about weapons, kind of how weapons are moving from Ukraine to Hamas. Possibly Ukraine is trading with Hamas. So they're trying to tell a story around that. And it just shows how really each actor is playing their own game. It seems to us maybe that the Russians are trying to harm us, Israelis, in their disinformation campaign against us, but really what the Russians are playing, they're playing the international community. They want to make sure that this war between Israel and Hamas means that Ukraine doesn't get any more weapons. This is their main aim, yes? And their whole disinformation campaign, this is kind of the fuel of their disinformation campaign, is to make Ukraine more isolated, to make Ukraine weaker. So after this war, they can pressure Ukraine into some kind of compromise.
Dr. Friedman, would you like to add anything?
Yes, it's very important not to fall into kind of the conspiracy theory of how Russians, Chinese, and Iranians sit together and coordinate an information attack against Israel or the rest of the world. Russians have no interest whatsoever in supporting Hamas. They are not supporting Hamas. They're playing their own game and de facto support Hamas. But they're doing it for their own interests. Iranians playing their own game, Chinese playing their own game. It's I would not say they are partners. They are kind of a marriage of convenience, if you like. This is another kind of term that was used there. Each one of them playing their own games with little, if at all, coordination. It's just happened that they're all playing on the same side. But each one of them pursues its own interests and plays its own game on different scale. Russians are playing this global game. Their main target audiences are even not in the West. Their main target audiences are in what is called Global South, which I don't like this term, but their main target audience is the Asian market, South America, Africa, and they want to tell their narrative.
But you do recognize, influence operation that the Russians and others are, leading here in the Middle East these days, right? You recognize those actors.
Well, yes. So first of all, we need to be very clear what we think about information campaign, because most of the information campaigns are conducted by actions, not necessarily by fake posts on social media, because they do stuff that communicates certain opinions and shapes people's perspectives and perceptions of these actions. So, but if we look in specifically on a very small part of these information operations, which is online activities and messages, if you like, spread through social media or even through Russian sponsored media channels like Sputnik and RT, yes, they're here, they've been here, and it's been around, like Vera said, for quite a while. And whatever they produce now about the war, it's just another small battle in the long-term, quite coherent campaign for the public opinion in their target audiences, which is mainly non-aligned third world countries.
Yeah, I mentioned before at the beginning that you are both based in London, in the UK. So I'd like you to compare, if you can, the strategies of Hamas and Israel regarding strategic communications. Can you finger or outline the strategies that you see as people that do not live in Israel but do follow what's happening in Israel? Dr. Michlin, you first.
So I think the main difference is, and this is something that Ofer and I outlined in an opinion piece we wrote for INSS quite recently. The main thing we identified is the tendency of Hamas to do two things. One is that they mainly their main aim is to, and what they're trying to do is to immerse themselves, to sort of hide within the Palestinian story. So the idea is that they are part of the resistance, right? So this is the resistance, and everything has context. So the Israelis have been attacking Palestine for all these years, and now this is really we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg, right? So this is not Hamas, this is the Palestinian people, it's free Palestine, it's ceasefire, it's peace, right? So they have this kind of a very strange marriage with a type of peacenik agenda. But it's strange, but it's actually very strong, and it's manifests itself again and again when you have these massive demonstrations in London, and the demonstrators, many of them, what they will come and tell you is that they're marching for peace, right? So that's one thing. And the other thing is that because they are immersing themselves within the Palestinian story, which is a story about suffering and resistance, they're also far less interested in pushing their facts, right? Facts are just there to illustrate a bigger story. Whereas what Israel does, in many cases, is that Israel tries to push forward facts. And these facts don't necessarily add into a particularly compelling story. So there are different stories, emotional stories, stories of hostages. Often now we see with the release of hostages that are very, that audiences can really relate to. But how do they fit within the bigger Israeli story? That is unclear. And that is something, this is the strategic side that both Ofer and I are really trying to kind of underline here, right? What is the strategy? What is the bigger story that you're telling? And then how these different little stories fit within it, and also the facts that you're trying to push.
Yeah, Ofer?
Yeah, but it's kind of exactly the same in the article that we wrote. We kind of use this metaphorical comparison between Hamas strategy and Israeli strategy, and a documentary movie and a fiction movie. What Hamas does, it produces a B- level a movie, fiction movie. They have a narrative, a long-term narrative that everything fits inside. Kind of people can follow. It creates certain associations. We can understand the story, the long-term story here. And Israel, on the other hand, produces a documentary. Now, there are two main problems with documentaries. The first one, people don't like watching documentaries, the majority of people. And the second one is documentary, it's about a particular event. There is no context in documentary. If we see how it works even now, after more than 50 days of war, Hamas story started 100 years ago. And this is the culmination. Israeli story started on the 7th of November, or the 7th of October. There was no context. There is no context there. People kind of, when they try to consume it, it's too factual, it's too dry, there is nothing to be empathetic about. The hostages, yes, but it's one of the stories, one of the messages, if you like, very tactical one, which play a certain benefit, provide certain benefit of doubt to Israeli overall Hasbara efforts. But rather than that, it's a documentary, very well made, very factually true, but people are just not interested to hear.
So I'd like to argue here that perhaps Israel's main problem, from our perspective, is that the consciousness and the concept of Israel fighting terrorism is much weaker than the perception people have about Palestinians being conquered for 50 years, and they have this idea of the big Goliath with the F-35s and F-16s against David, the little Palestinians. So it's very hard to maintain the pictures coming from the kibbutzim for many days. And this is why after 3 days or 10 days, most of the editors in the international press, they ran to embrace the Palestinian narrative again. It's very hard to change or to influence the perceptions people have in their minds, right?
So, I mean, Attila, I mean, you have this vast experience in journalism, right? So, I mean, when you go to your when you sit in your newsroom, right? So you're looking for a big story. So there was a big story on the 7th of October. There was a big story. There was a massacre that took place. It's a terrible, terrible massacre. And we have to give credit where credit is due. Journalists, professional journalists, they reported this massacre, and that was the news. But then Israel started to amass a 300,000+ army on the borders on its borders. So as a professional journalist, I mean, what would you continue covering a massacre that was there? You covered it, you showed the world the details, and now it's over and a new story began.
So you're saying actually
right?
This is the circle of news, right? It's every day you have something new, so you have to report it, but it depends how you analyze it, how your commentary is going, right? Because you can always frame the debate as you wish when you're an editor. And the problem is that Israelis have no real dialogue with the Western press. I mean, even on the 17th of October, when the claims from Hamas came saying that Israel bombarded a hospital, New York Times editors preferred to take their narrative and put it out there as a headline, that not the Israelis claim that we had nothing to do with it. So it's a problem that is much deeper than just the cycle of news, right?
Mm-hmm. So I mean, so coming back to that, but this is what I've given you, and you rightly pointed to the point, to the fact that there are also, and this is the narratives that we're talking about, right? So there are the ongoing stories that's been there and formed international media's mind. So on the one hand, you have the kind of knee-jerk, right? Or it's not knee-jerk, it's a professional behavior. There is a story, report the story. The story is staring at you, right? You have a massacre, report the massacre. You have a war, report the war. So on that level, we can expect that this is what international media is going to do. We can also expect, if we think, and this is what Ofer mentioned, the target audience analysis, right? We can also expect that they've already been telling for years and years and years a certain story about the Palestinians, yes? And that story will continue to weave through whatever they're going to continue telling about this war. So we know all of that. We have to work with that. We know all of these things are known to us, right? And I'm going to give back the floor to Ofer, but this war is going to end at some point. And for many Israelis, this is the problem, it will be case closed. Yes? So this is how this was reported, case closed, we move on to the next, whatever is going to happen. Case not closed. Whatever has been told during this war, it will continue to be part of the story. The story is ongoing. It's ontological. It has a kind of an ontology to it, right? It has this continuation to it. And it will form the opinions of how next events are going to be told. So it's never ending. You can't end the conversation there. And it's a continuous work. It's a continuous shaping and shifting of narratives. And this is where I think this is really where the long-term side, this is really where we need to hit harder.
Yeah, to develop a dialogue with public opinion. Before we sum it up, I'd like to focus for 2 minutes on social media and on Ofer. You just mentioned the word hasbara. It took us a few minutes, and I'm very proud of that we didn't go straight ahead to hasbara, with meaning explaining ourselves. Israel is trying to explain itself, and I think this time we saw many Israelis joining in trying to help Israel's narrative break out to the millions of people out there on social media. Does it work? Did it work? Maybe it's a lost cause. How do you see it, Ofer?
A few things. Just a small comment on the previous one. I think when you said that Israel fails to communicate the fight against terrorism, we need to remember that if you want to communicate to the Western public the fight against terrorism, it automatically connects to their narratives of the fight of the against terrorism for the last 20 years, which was failing. They're thinking about their governments that led them to 2 huge failed attempts to fight terrorism in Iraq and Afghanistan. And now Israel is coming. Oh, we are fighting Israel as well. So trying to build this narrative of Israel is fighting terrorists here, it's actually counterproductive if you want to win the public opinion in the West, which thinks that fighting against terrorism abroad doesn't work. Didn't work for the last 20 years. So this is one thing. And about
so the hashtag "the West is next," you wouldn't recommend it?
I would not recommend it, because the last thing that you do in the strategic communications or even political communications is threaten your target audience. It never works. If you want to,
well, sometimes negative campaign works.
No politicians will win in elections by threatening their voters. He will win, or she will win, by promising a brighter future, not by promising a solution, not by identifying the problem. So threatening audiences never works, and this kind of leads us naturally to social media. I have my reservations about the social media campaigns. A, because they were highly uncoordinated. B, from the analysis of social media campaigns, especially politics related or foreign affairs related, we still see enormous dominance of traditional media, even if it's traditional media communicated via social media. And secondly, we also have to remember that the consumption of social media is characterized by echo chambers. So essentially, yes, we promote all these communities created in Israel. They push their messages out. The vast majority, the overwhelming majorities of these messages end up at the screens of already convinced.
Right. So it's a lost cause from this perspective.
Well, I would say it's a very good result as an act of self-therapy. So you can reinforce your own bubble, your own echo chamber, and suddenly all your stories on Instagram and Facebook. They're all kind of suddenly in support of Israel. But to say that it actually shapes and shifts narratives, even those which in the middle, not to say those who pro-Palestinians, it's a very, very big leap.
Yeah, you just reminded me of Harper Lee, the American writer that once said, I'm not sure I know the quotation, the exact quotation, but it said something like, people like to hear what they want to hear and like to watch what they want to watch. So this is in some ways the same with us. Dr. Michlin, it's your turn to end the conversation with us with a reasonable and optimistic thought.
Yes, I mean, I will continue with the point that I think that we really should reiterate, and I made earlier on, which is the long-term nature of this, and I wouldn't use the metaphor of war, right? But it's an effort, right? There is an effort to and again to tell your story in a way that shapes and shifts attitudes and behaviors in target audiences. And there is a huge amount of research, writing, and practice around this around the world. It's really an emerging field. Unfortunately, I think the Israeli approach, and it's kind of, it's almost a traditional Israeli approach, which is that we are going to do what we think is right. And then we'll try to explain it. And if we manage to explain it, great. And if we don't, then okay, whatever. We just keep doing what we think is right. I mean, that in a way is already giving up on shaping and shifting attitudes and behaviors in target audiences, because what you're saying is that I am going to do what I'm going to do regardless. If you're with me, you're with me. If you're not with me, you're not with me. And 10 years later, you wake up and you find that not many people are with you, right? And there is a big surprise why they're not with you. So I think, as many things, it starts within the attitude, right? The attitude of, if I'm interested in moving target audiences in my direction, then I need to go there and work with them.
Yeah, right. And perhaps the thought or the idea of having billions of people, applaud and standing ovation, giving us standing ovations for fighting for the West or for the liberals all over the world is just a childish idea, and we will never get it. So we should focus on just fighting our wars and being, right, being moral and being who we are. Dr. Michlin, Shapir,
well,
and
I think we can change things, Attila. I do want us to be optimistic at the end. I think we can change things, but what I'm saying is that we need to put an effort into it.
Right. I'd like to thank you both for joining me from London. It was fantastic and super interesting. We'll be in touch, I'm guessing. And Fakeland, this podcast, we all will be glad to host you again in the near future to hear your inputs. Thank you so much, Dr. Vera Michlin Shapir and Ofer Friedman. Dr. Friedman, thank you so much. And I want to thank also Konard Adenauer Stiftung here in Israel for being so generous and helping us produce this podcast, Fakeland, here at the INSS. I'm Attila Somfalvi. Till next time. Bye-bye.